Lexi Hart and Brandon Cole looked like the perfect couple online. #love, matching smiles, and endless filters. But behind every picture-perfect post was a storm of jealousy, obsession, and control. When Lexi realized she was losing Brandon's attention, she didn't just break his heart. She decided to end his life. What started as a fairy tale romance turned into one of Florida's most chilling true crime cases, proving that sometimes the person who says they love you most is the one you should fear the most. The Crime Scene presents a new page of crime, a new mystery, a new shock case. Lexi Hart and Brandon Cole looked like the kind of couple everyone wanted to be. They were young, attractive, and always seemed to have that effortless chemistry people envy. Lexi worked part-time at a boutique, always showing up with perfect hair, a bright smile, and designer knockoffs that looked real enough to fool anyone. Brandon was a blue-collar guy, grease under his nails, and a laid-back grin that made people instantly like him. They met at a car show 2 years earlier, and from the outside, it seemed like a fairy tale. But the fairy tales people post online are often edited lies. Lexi was addicted to attention, likes, comments, validation. She needed to feel adored, and when Brandon started spending more time at the garage instead of texting her every hour, she didn't take it well. Their perfect relationship started to show cracks. She'd scroll through his social media late at night, zooming in on photos of girls who left heart emojis on his posts, building stories in her head that weren't true. Brandon brushed off her jealousy at first, thinking she'd chill out eventually, but he had no idea what was brewing inside her mind. Behind her sweet smiles and matching outfits, Lexi was losing control. Her obsession wasn't love anymore, it was possession. The more Brandon tried to live normally, the more she needed to control him. Her world revolved around being seen as the perfect girlfriend, the one everyone envied. But deep down, she couldn't stand not being the center of his universe. That insecurity grew into resentment, and that resentment started to rot into something darker. Clearwater might have seen them as the golden couple, but something inside Lexi Hart was twisting, and soon, Brandon would pay the price for loving her. It started small, jealous comments, suspicious glances, a sarcastic remark here and there. But soon, Lexi's paranoia started bleeding into every corner of her life. She'd scroll through Brandon's phone while he was in the shower, pretending to check the time while really scanning his messages for any female name she didn't recognize. Every "hey man" text became a secret code in her head, every new client at his shop a potential threat. When Brandon laughed too loud at work stories or stayed out a little later than usual, she'd assume he was lying. Her insecurity turned into full-on surveillance. Friends started to notice that Brandon seemed drained, like he was walking on eggshells all the time. He stopped hanging out after work, scared Lexi would accuse him of something again. When he did go out, she'd blow up his phone. 10 calls, 15 texts, all variations of "where are you?" or "who are you with?" Brandon tried to calm her down, telling himself she was just going through a rough patch. But deep down, he felt the chill of something off. Lexi wasn't just jealous, she was obsessed with control. She wanted to own his time, his emotions, his choices. If she couldn't reach him, she'd show up at his garage just to surprise him, then glare at any woman within 10 feet. It stopped being cute a long time ago. Her smiles were stretched too tight, her tone sugary but sharp underneath. In her mind, every moment Brandon spent without her was proof he was slipping away. And if he was slipping away, she wasn't about to let that happen. Lexi didn't just want to be loved. She wanted to be needed, even if it meant burning everything down to get it. By the time winter rolled around, Lexi had already made up her mind. If Brandon was going to leave her, she'd make sure he never got the chance. Her thoughts stopped being emotional outbursts and turned into calculated planning. She spent hours online, searching for ways to stage an accident, erase evidence, and disappear suspicion. Her search history was a dark trail of curiosity mixed with madness. Articles about sedatives, forensic timelines, and drowning statistics. Every click made her feel smarter, more in control, like she was rewriting the script of her own twisted movie. In public, she was all charm and sweetness. She brought cookies to Brandon's coworkers, posted happy couple photos, and laughed louder than ever. Nobody suspected a thing. She played the part perfectly, an innocent girlfriend trying to fix her relationship. But when she was alone, her mask dropped. She practiced fake crying in the mirror, rehearsed lines she'd use if the cops ever asked questions, and even timed how long it would take to drive from the lake to the nearest police station. Lexi told herself she wasn't evil, just desperate. She believed she was the victim of Brandon's emotional neglect. In her twisted logic, his lack of attention justified everything. If she couldn't have his love, she'd have his silence. She even started collecting little details for the plan: an old wine bottle, a box of sleeping pills, and the idea of a weekend getaway that would make it all look like a tragic accident. Each day, her confidence grew. She thought she was too clever to get caught, too charming for anyone to suspect her. To everyone else, Lexi Hart was still the perfect girlfriend. But inside, she had already crossed the line between heartbreak and homicide, and there was no turning back. Lexi pitched the idea like it was a romantic gesture. A quiet weekend getaway at a lakeside Airbnb to reconnect, just the two of them. No phones, no drama. Brandon thought it sounded peaceful, maybe exactly what they needed. He didn't notice the way her eyes lit up, not with love, but with calculation. She booked a cozy cabin tucked deep in the woods by Clearwater Lake, the kind of spot people posted on Pinterest boards. The photos looked perfect: a wooden dock, a warm fireplace, and a private stretch of water that glistened under the Florida sun. Before they left, Lexi packed their bags like she was heading on vacation, but her suitcase had more than clothes and makeup. Hidden beneath her things was a crushed bottle of prescription sleeping pills she'd stolen from her mom's medicine cabinet, already ground into a fine powder. She rehearsed her story in her head the entire drive there, smiling at Brandon, holding his hand, pretending everything was okay. The lake house was quiet, almost too quiet. Brandon grilled burgers on the deck while Lexi poured wine, acting playful, snapping selfies, pretending she wanted to capture new memories. He had no clue the glass in his hand was already his death sentence. As the sun dipped below the trees, the sky painted in orange and pink, she felt an eerie calm wash over her. It was all falling into place, the perfect setup for the perfect crime. That night, when the breeze from the lake brushed against the cabin windows, Brandon sat beside her on the couch, completely unaware that the person he loved most was calculating every move. Lexi's smile didn't shake. To her, it wasn't murder, it was justice in her own twisted sense of love. The night at the lake started off like something out of a romantic movie. The air was cool, the crickets were singing, and the soft glow from the lanterns danced across the water. Brandon looked completely at peace, thinking the trip was a turning point for them. He didn't notice the faint bitterness in his wine or the way Lexi watched him sip it. Her pulse steady, her expression unreadable. She kept pouring more, encouraging him to drink, laughing at his jokes, playing the role she'd perfected: sweet, loving, and loyal. As the night went on, Brandon's eyelids grew heavier. He rubbed his forehead, blaming the drowsiness on the long drive. Lexi helped him up, wrapping her arm around him, whispering that he just needed to rest. Inside, her mind was cold, methodical. She guided him to bed, tucked him in, and stood there for a moment watching him fade into unconsciousness. The rise and fall of his chest slowed, his breathing shallow and uneven. That's when she knew the pills were working. When the clock hit midnight, she dragged him from the bed, her strength fueled by adrenaline and something darker. Outside, the lake shimmered under the moonlight, the surface still and silent. She pulled him across the dock, her bare feet slipping on the wet wood, and with one final breath, she pushed him into the black water. The splash echoed once, then silence swallowed everything. Lexi stood there watching the ripples fade. Her heart didn't race, her hands didn't shake. She just stared at the spot where Brandon disappeared, whispering to herself that it was done. When she finally went back inside, she wiped down the counters, rinsed the glasses, and posted an old smiling photo of them on Instagram with the caption, "My forever." The next morning, Lexi woke up early and stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. She rehearsed her panic face, wide eyes, shaky breathing, fake tears. It was time to play the grieving girlfriend. She dialed 911 with trembling fingers and let her voice break as she told the operator that her boyfriend was missing. She said they'd gone for a late-night walk by the lake, that he'd been drinking, that she'd woken up and he was gone. The story sounded believable enough. But her tone wavered in strange places, her pauses too long, her emotion just a bit too forced. When the cops arrived, Lexi turned it up a notch, running toward them, sobbing, holding out Brandon's hoodie like a prop. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks as she explained the accident. But the officers noticed something off. There were no footprints leading from the cabin to the lake. No signs of a struggle, no wet marks, nothing that lined up with her version. Her story changed every time she retold it. First, she said Brandon went out for a smoke. Then she said he was sitting on the dock when she went to bed. Then it turned into him going for a swim. Detectives exchanged glances, sensing the cracks. Lexi tried to stay calm, but her performance was starting to slip. Every question made her fidget, every pause felt like a trap. Still, without a body, there wasn't much they could do. She volunteered to help search, pretending to be devastated, even posing for local news cameras pleading for information. By sunset, the search team combed through the shoreline, dragging nets through the water. Lexi stood by the dock, arms folded, face blank behind the fake tears. Deep down, she thought she'd pulled it off. But the lake wasn't finished with her yet. 2 days later, the lake gave up its secret. A local fisherman spotted something tangled near the reeds, a body floating face down, clothes bloated and skin pale under the morning sun. He called it in, voice shaking, and within an hour, the once peaceful lakeside was crawling with police, divers, and flashing lights. Lexi showed up in a hurry, pretending to collapse when she saw the body bag being lifted onto the shore. She screamed Brandon's name for show, but the officers watching her weren't convinced. Her act looked rehearsed, the tears too timed, the sobs too loud. The medical examiner worked fast, and the results hit hard. Brandon had high levels of sleeping pills in his system, enough to knock him out cold long before he ever hit the water. His lungs told the truth. He hadn't drowned naturally. There were bruises on his shoulders, finger-shaped, consistent with someone forcing him down. It was no accident. Someone had staged the scene to look like one. Detectives returned to the cabin and started digging deeper. They found traces of wine on the dock, fingerprints wiped from surfaces, and Lexi's phone filled with staged photos from the weekend. One investigator described the whole setup as too clean to be real. It looked more like a movie set than a tragedy. News spread fast through Clearwater. People who once admired Lexi started whispering behind her back, remembering every strange thing she'd ever said or done. The perfect girlfriend image was cracking, and the town could sense something rotten underneath. Lexi, meanwhile, played the grieving lover role on repeat, attending vigils and interviews, clinging to her performance. But the evidence was already building a case against her, piece by piece. The lake had spoken, and now, justice was starting to stir. The investigation shifted gears fast once the autopsy results came in. Detectives started digging into Lexi's life, and what they found online didn't match the grieving girlfriend she pretended to be. Her Instagram was filled with carefully curated sadness, black and white selfies, long captions about soulmates, and candlelight photos with captions like asterisk, "I'll never love again." Asterisk, but it all looked too polished, too staged, like she was performing for an audience rather than mourning a loss. Behind the filters, digital forensics told a completely different story. Investigators retrieved deleted messages between Lexi and an old boyfriend where she complained that Brandon didn't appreciate her and that he'd regret everything soon. They found screenshots of her Google searches. Asterisk how to fake a drowning. Asterisk how to delete search history after death. What's the fastest acting sleeping pill? Every click she thought she'd erased came back to life on her devices, painting a picture of obsession and premeditation. Even her social media drafts were revealing. One post, never published, read, asterisk, "Some people have to die to prove how real love can be." Asterisk, that line alone chilled detectives to the bone. It wasn't grief, it was ego. She wanted attention, even in death's shadow. The police also pulled security footage from a local pharmacy, showing Lexi buying sleeping aids 2 weeks before the trip. She'd used cash, wearing a baseball cap pulled low, but the timing lined up too perfectly. Everything was falling into place. When detectives questioned her again, her tone had changed. Gone was the sobbing, trembling act. She sounded tired, defensive, irritated by their constant harassment. Her confidence started to crack when they mentioned the digital trail. Lexi still believed she could outsmart them, but the walls were closing in, and her picture-perfect story was about to shatter completely. Detectives decided it was time to corner Lexi with the truth. They called her back into the station for a few follow-up questions, but this time, they didn't play nice. They had everything lined up: her Google searches, the pharmacy footage, the fingerprints on the wine bottle, and the inconsistencies in her statements. When they laid the photos on the table, Lexi froze for just a second, that perfect poker face slipping before she forced a smirk. She tried to act unfazed, claiming she didn't know what they were talking about. They pressed harder. One detective leaned in and asked why her fingerprints were on a sleeping pill container found near Brandon's belongings. She blinked, paused too long, and muttered something about cleaning up. The tone shifted immediately. The room got heavier, the silence sharper. They caught every flicker of her discomfort, every tiny twitch in her expression. Lexi tried to cry again, reaching for her usual tricks, but this time the tears wouldn't come. Her mask was cracking in real time. When they asked her to explain the Google searches, she claimed she'd been researching for a true crime podcast idea. The detectives didn't even bother to hide their disbelief. Every lie only made her look guiltier. Forensics reports confirmed the sleeping pill traces in Brandon's drink matched the same brand Lexi purchased. Her perfect plan was now an open book of evidence. By the end of the interrogation, Lexi wasn't talking much. She just stared at the table, lips tight, jaw clenched, knowing the game was over. What she thought was genius now looked pathetic under the fluorescent lights. The perfect girlfriend story had collapsed completely, replaced by the cold truth: a jealous manipulator who thought she could choreograph murder and get away with it. When detectives finally pushed her past the edge, Lexi's act shattered completely. The tears stopped, the trembling stopped, and for the first time, her voice turned steady, too steady. She leaned back in her chair, smirking, eyes glassy but calm. What came next wasn't a confession born out of guilt, but out of arrogance. She said Brandon made her lose it, that he deserved what he got. Her words were cold, almost rehearsed, and the detectives just sat there in disbelief. This wasn't some panicked girl who made a mistake. This was someone who genuinely believed she'd done nothing wrong. When asked why she'd planned it so carefully, she shrugged and said she just wanted peace, that she was tired of being made a fool of. The way she spoke about the murders sounded like she was describing a breakup, not a life she'd ended. What made it worse was the pride behind her words. She called herself smarter than the rest, bragged about how close she'd come to pulling it off, and laughed when they told her about the evidence that caught her. That smirk, unshaken, chilling, almost triumphant, was the photo that would later spread across every headline. The media dubbed her the smiling killer girlfriend, a face that looked more like she was posing for a magazine cover than a mugshot. The detectives didn't need another word. Her confession, her attitude, her complete lack of remorse, it sealed her fate. Even the officers who'd seen the worst of humanity walked out of that room disturbed. It wasn't just the crime that haunted them, but the calm way she owned it. Lexi Hart had turned her love story into a murder scene, and she still thought she'd won. But her twisted confidence had just written her own downfall. By the time Lexi's trial started, Clearwater had turned into a circus. News vans lined the courthouse steps, reporters shoved microphones in faces, and true crime bloggers filled the benches like it was front-row entertainment. Everyone wanted a glimpse of the girl who smiled after murder. Lexi walked in wearing a cream-colored blazer, hair perfectly curled, flashing that same eerie half-smile at the cameras. She didn't look like a killer. She looked like someone auditioning for reality TV. And that made it all even creepier. The prosecution tore her story apart piece by piece. They painted her as a manipulative narcissist who couldn't handle not being the center of attention. They showed the jury her search history, the texts to her ex, the photos from the trip, and the chilling confession she gave during interrogation. Every piece of evidence screamed premeditation. The defense tried to spin it as temporary insanity, claiming Lexi's mental state broke under emotional pressure. But the jury wasn't buying it, especially when Lexi rolled her eyes during testimony and laughed at the wrong moments. The moment the verdict was read, the entire courtroom froze. Asterisk guilty. First-degree murder. Asterisk no chance of parole. Lexi didn't flinch. She just tilted her head slightly and smirked like she'd expected it all along. Cameras caught that exact second, her unbothered face as the judge sentenced her to life. It became the most replayed clip on the evening news. Outside the courthouse, Brandon's family cried, holding each other tight. His mother said through tears, "She took everything from us." Meanwhile, Lexi was led away in cuffs, still looking like she owned the room. The Golden Girl act was over, but she'd gotten what she wanted all along: attention. Only now, it came with concrete walls and a lifetime to remember what she'd done. The internet exploded the moment Lexi's verdict hit the news. Her smirking mugshot was everywhere, on Twitter memes, TikTok reenactments, YouTube deep dives, and Reddit threads that picked apart every second of the trial. People were obsessed. Some called her a real-life femme fatale. Others labeled her the definition of psychotic. Hashtags like #SmilingKiller and #LexiHeartTrial trended for weeks. True crime channels racked up millions of views breaking down her behavior, her fake crying, her twisted smile. Every corner of the internet had a theory. Was she born evil or just broken? Lexi had become a phenomenon, and she loved it. From her prison cell, she soaked in every ounce of attention she could get. She sent letters to journalists, scribbled in flowery handwriting about how she was misunderstood, and hinted at writing a tell-all book one day. Some of her fan mail came from people who actually admired her confidence, calling her beautifully dangerous. It was sickening, but it showed how fame could grow from even the darkest acts. But fame fades fast. Within a year, the public moved on to the next viral scandal, and Lexi's name started disappearing from headlines. The fan mail slowed, the documentaries stopped trending, and the spotlight she craved went dark. Inside, reality hit hard. Prison wasn't glamorous. It was loud, cold, and unforgiving. The same charm she once used to manipulate people didn't work on hardened inmates. Meanwhile, Brandon's story started to outshine hers. His family launched a foundation in his name, raising awareness about toxic relationships and emotional manipulation. While Lexi's name became a cautionary tale, Brandon's legacy turned into hope for others. The internet had made her famous for all the wrong reasons, but in the end, she wasn't remembered as a star, just as a warning. Prison stripped Lexi of everything she thought made her powerful. The mirror that once reflected a perfectly curated image now showed the truth: dark circles, tangled hair, and a cold emptiness behind her eyes. At first, she thought she could handle it. She strutted through the cell block with that same smug confidence, tossing out fake smiles like armor. She bragged to anyone who'd listen about how she outsmarted the system, how the media couldn't stop talking about her. But inside those concrete walls, no one cared who she was. The other inmates weren't impressed by her vanity. They saw weakness and used it. It started with whispers, little jabs about her past. Then it escalated. Someone stole her food. Another poured soap in her bed. One night, a fight broke out in the showers, and Lexi ended up on the floor, bleeding from a busted lip and a broken nose. Her mask finally cracked. The girl who once controlled every detail of her image now sat alone in her cell, staring at the wall, realizing she couldn't manipulate her way out of this place. Her letters to reporters became shorter, her handwriting shakier. The words shifted from bragging to begging. She wrote about nightmares, how she couldn't sleep without seeing Brandon's face rising from the water. Even she started to question whether she'd gone too far, not out of guilt, but because she hated losing control of the narrative. The guard said she grew quieter as the months went on. No more fake tears, no more dramatics, just silence. The attention that once fueled her ego was gone, replaced by the dull rhythm of prison life. For the first time in her life, Lexi Hart wasn't in control of anyone's story, not even her own. And that was her real punishment. Brandon Cole's name lived on long after the trial ended. His family turned their pain into purpose, creating a foundation in his honor to help victims of manipulation and emotional abuse. His mother spoke at schools and community centers, reminding people that love should never feel like control. Every year on the anniversary of his death, candles were lit by the lake where he took his last breath. A place that once held tragedy now turned into a symbol of strength and awareness. Lexi Hart, meanwhile, became nothing more than a faded headline. The girl who once thought she could outsmart everyone was now just inmate number 52719, spending her days cleaning the prison cafeteria and keeping her head down. The world had moved on without her. No more cameras, no more interviews, no more likes or followers, just silence and steel bars. She still tried to hold on to fragments of her old self, but time eroded everything. The charm, the beauty, the attention, all gone. Inside her cell, she sometimes stared at the small window, the sunlight cutting through the dust like a reminder of the freedom she'd thrown away. The guards said she rarely spoke, only murmuring to herself, as if replaying her own story over and over, searching for a version where she still won. But there wasn't one. Brandon's foundation grew, saving lives and spreading awareness about the red flags people often ignore until it's too late. His name became a voice of hope, while Lexi's became a cautionary tale told in true crime podcasts and documentaries. She thought she could kill her boyfriend and walk away untouched. But in the end, she didn't just destroy him, she destroyed herself. Evil might wear a pretty face, but it never wins. Not really.